If you work hard and you go the extra mile, you get results. And you imagine your future in a different way. We see the American dreams. This is number one. Number two, the American dream is not actually only for Americans. I've never been to the US, but I adapted that dream. And I have seen so many people in Afghanistan living the American dream. So many people in Syria, in Iraq, in South Sudan, in the bush, in remote areas, living that dream. I think there are so many things in common, way more than what people realize, between us in the global south, or myself, and you in the US, in America.
Welcome back, everyone, to Unsung Americans. Thanks again for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe. And in particular, please share this episode and all other episodes with your most skeptical friends and family. We want people to hear a different perspective. We want people to be informed about what real foreign aid looks like with all the politics pulled out of it and just real talk in everyday plain English. I'm the host, your host, Alex Natsios. I have a guest today that I'm excited. I'm particularly excited about this episode, Ali, because this is different from the other episodes we've done thus far. First and foremost, because you're not American, you're not sitting in the U.S. either, and we'll get into all kinds of details as to why you're on Unsung Americans. But I'm looking forward to the discussion today. The other thing that's interesting about this is we really don't know each other at all. And I've had other guests where maybe we didn't know each other well, but we knew each other a little bit. And in this case, we don't really know each other, do we? You approached me and we had our first conversation yesterday and just kind of got a bit acquainted, and you had so many interesting things to say that were in several cases caught me off guard in a way that made me keep thinking and reflecting on these things afterwards. So anyway, I'm talking too much here. Ali, I'm pleased to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself and maybe speak a bit to where you came, where you're from, and then we can get into how you got into doing foreign assistance work.
First, thank you so much for hosting me and for all the great things that you are doing. I technically, someone told me about your podcast. I watched the first episode and then the second one, and then I got curious. Sometimes I agreed, other times I disagreed, and I felt like, you know what, I'm going to reach out to him and tell him my perspective. So my name is Ali. I was born in a village in South Syria, which didn't get that much government development there. So this means that we mainly had two main roads. The main source of income there was mainly farming. You get water a few hours a week. You get electricity a few hours a day. The internet in that location is through something called internet cafe. So you can count those internet cafes on one hand. I think we had like three or four. No TV, no computer, all that didn't exist. But the people, we had each other. So we would sit and talk and discuss things. Anyway, so I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. My father approach towards life and success was mainly work hard. And my mother formula for success was mainly education and learning. We had, I want to call it the Syrian dream, which was mainly around family, community, and a job. And, I grew up in that environment and that ecosystem. So several events happened when I was a young adult that led me to volunteering and try to support other people in my community. After several years of volunteering, I decided to work in the humanitarian development sector and make that my career. So I took several assignments. I was stationed in 13 countries in Middle East, in Asia, in Africa. I have worked with local and international organizations. nonprofit organizations. I joined the United Nations. I worked with the Red Cross, Red Crescent. I led operations and programs in countries, both emergency response and development, in locations like Afghanistan, Iraq, South Sudan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, of course, Syria, cross border operations. I managed in all the 13 countries USAID grants, in all of them. Emergency, development, nexus, durable solutions, the different type of programming that USAID supported countries with. After working at country level, I moved to global level. And there I mainly moved to Europe, stationed in Denmark, overseeing a portfolio of more than $1,500,000,000. I covered over 40 countries, engaged with USAID and so many other donors as well. And for the past year and a half, I've been engaging with diplomats, with nonprofit organizations, with policymakers, with private sector, and trying to um, rethink how we do development and humanitarian assistance and focus at governance and policy and all those different angles. So that's kind of like my journey. I saw the sector from different angles, and as you said, I'm not American, never been to the US, but I benefit so much from your institutions throughout my journey.
You've never been to the US. That's even more fun.
Never.
That's even more
Although
fun
my
for me.
my master is from Michigan University in social science, policy and research.
You said something interesting there. I want to ask about. You said the last year and a half you have been working with different um, donors, partners in the space, and kind of work on foreign aid on how to look at doing things differently. I think that's interesting because since February, when USAID was dismantled, USAID was probably the they were the most influential, significant foreign aid player in the world, I would say, right? So that has created waves across the whole world of all the organizations trying to do foreign aid work. Um, so I say that, many of us are forced to rethink how to do it because USAID's gone. Um, but you weren't, it sounds like you weren't doing that sort of, that was not the impetus. That wasn't the reason why you were looking at how to do things differently, because you said it was a year and a half ago, right? Um, so why were you looking at how the work should be done differently?
Good question. So number one, um, I am one of those who anticipated that this could happen. And I remember in January, early January, I made a presentation what the Trump administration means to international aid and development. And the recording is there. You could go through it and see it. And I spoke about USAID, I spoke about Doge, I spoke about what will happen with the UN and all those things. So I kind of like saw that coming. This is number one. Number two, I have seen the indicators of the collapsing of the way we do humanitarian and development assistance globally. And that's from way before, what happened with USAID, because I have seen that the funding in general is decreasing, the needs are increasing, there is a global access crisis, we are not able to reach those communities in need. We have a governance and let's say a policy crisis where we struggled in adapting to the new realities. It's very difficult to redesign and rethink our programs, and we have an issue with the program design and so many different things there. So I saw that coming because I have worked at different levels, as I mentioned. So I could see the cracks in the system, and I could see that the system, it's reaching its limitation. And I decided to take action, do something about it. So I started in the beginning years ago to raise awareness about that, speak about it, because COVID-19 woke me up that there is an issue here. So I kept doing that. It was mainly through my writing and joining webinars or writing articles or having discussions. But then I realized that I need to go outside the institution where I was working to be able to engage with others beyond my scope of work. And that's what happened around a year and few months. I left my last job and I decided to start doing that. And I did that in different ways. So I joined organizations as a board member, as non-executive advisor, and I did that in different capacities. And all that was voluntary work. So I did that with so many organizations as a volunteer, trying to help them through that, not only nonprofit organizations, but also several policymakers and, as I mentioned, diplomats and even private sector.
One of the best ways to lift people out of poverty and to create more, more equality and stability and prosperity and peace and all that is private sector investment, right? What I worry about without a USAID, with USAID being gone, is often the role USAID played that I saw was they would go in somewhere and say, back to that point earlier about, who's the private sector partner here, or, who's a viable private sector partner that's willing to put some capital, that's willing to spend money, invest, you know, um, often it's several companies that said, we want to do business there, but it's too risky. USA would say,
Mhm.
we will de-risk it because you see some commercial viability here in the agriculture markets, or something in Vietnam, let's say. I don't mean that's not a good example because that isn't necessarily a super risky place to do business, but I don't know, maybe Nigeria or Kenya or something. Um, but that was an important function, and it wasn't. That function was not just kind of handing out all these grants and just giving American taxpayer money away. It was saying, we can create some more economic competitiveness by spending some money here, with the private sector also spending some money, which ultimately benefits American consumers, but while at the same time creating more prosperity in a country. And I don't want to belabor that topic because I've we've covered it in other episodes. Let me shift that over into a question. Did you see that kind of thing happening? Did you see that, like, in any of the projects you were working on, or in Syria? Or I'm curious because you may say, actually,
Five,
I
so
don't
it's so
know.
many times. So let me let me first reflect on what you said. Number one, I want to add to what you mentioned when you talked about private sector and the market and all that. Jobs, they have very strong impact also on freedom, not only, when it comes to economic growth and all that. And I want to zoom in into the American context. Martin Luther King, when he spoke about the speech of I Have a Dream, that march called jobs and freedom. And it was even jobs first. And I could see in so many countries, and I told you in Syria, it's about family, community, and job. So creating jobs is a very important element, and it's kind of the foundation in so many conversations when we speak and we try to engage, with the private sector, humanitarian development policymakers, and all that, because we look at creating jobs and those opportunities as a way to create other opportunities and progress in that direction. Now, to answer your question, um, Bangladesh, when I was working there, I was the chief of party managing Food for Peace program, funded by USAID. It was mainly programs called Cash for Work, which means we work with communities there, with local actors there to create those, jobs, or they could do something within their societies. Now I'll tell you what we did. It was 2020. Chief of party, I was managing that consortium, two international actors, one national actors. My deputy chief of party was from Bangladesh. Our work was mainly supporting community groups, those who were displaced from Myanmar in the largest refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, and the people in Bangladesh in addressing community needs. One of it was fixing roads. One of it was uh, fixing infrastructure related to hospitals. One of it was supporting in bridges. One of it was empowering those community centers there. Now, one of the things that happened was during that time, COVID. And at that time, we were all evacuated. So the country was mainly led by those locals who are from there and the organization and all that. My scope was mainly related to two things. one, take high quality decisions. Two, delegate. What I liked about USAID at that time, in every single conversation I had with them around that programming, they were asking me about the handover to the communities to be able to rely on themselves. They were asking me about the private sector engagement, and they were asking me how you are not causing any harm to disturb the market there, that supply chain, supply and demand. And I think this is one of the examples where in that consortium, in the work that we were doing during that extremely challenging time, I could see how USAID pushed us beyond our comfort zone of working and collaborating with UN agencies and humanitarian actors towards collaborating with the government institutions as well as private sector. And, it was community-centered approach and people-centered, and the people took the ownership. Number two, during COVID-19, all the health cases, all the things about the market, and all the things were happening in Cox's Bazar and Bangladesh at that time needed infrastructure. And those small, tiny initiatives here and there that the community were doing when it comes to a road or a bridge or etc., they were part of that infrastructure. And, at that time, business owners used those roads. Implements use those roles. Can I measure the impact? It's a kind of it's very difficult to do it, but that was one of the things that came from the collaboration between us, how USAID pushed us beyond the limits, government and private sector, purely led by the people who are there. So I think I find that success story. And just briefly, I want to mention another one, Nigeria. I just love that experience there with USAID and USAID focal points there. We were working at emergency activities, and they said, let's think long term. They started supporting us as organizations by creating a platform where we, as organization, NGOs or nonprofit organizations, United Nations, mainly UNDP, as well as other actors from the governments, and having conversations around stabilization and durable solutions. And experiencing that and working to move toward development and long-term thinking and all that was also one of the things that platform was created by the support of USAID and those conversations. So I liked it so much when USAID were pushing us outside that comfort zone to engage with the wider ecosystem.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I worked almost exclusively for private contractors that worked with USAID that did did a lot of the work on the ground, kind of closest to the front lines, so to speak, like you. I know that's not all you did, but we've done some similar things, I think. Um, that generally not generally, everyone I know that had worked in the USAID system and infrastructure, I think we're all the best people. We were the best people to say, this is what doesn't actually function well and what could be fixed. And unfortunately, that's not actually who has informed the destruction. Meaning, obviously, that we're not the people that informed the destruction of USAID. I think if a lot of the things that needed to be fixed could have actually been fixed by working closely with and partnering with the people that were already doing the work. I'm saying all that to frame a larger point, I think, which is that you're describing something that people who are critical of USAID will say, well, it needed reform. People should just be, other countries should be able to take care of themselves. USAID wasn't helping with that. That's why we needed to get rid of them. It was not having the impact. And everything you just said and everything you're saying, and frankly, what I've generally experienced too, is the focus on trying to move people and empower people to not be reliant on donor funding. I mean, I saw that happen more and more over the last 20 years, the amount of time I've been doing this work. So that, to be honest, is one of the things that really frustrates me right now, because what's happened by destroying USAID is that goal of trying to get countries to be more independent and solve their own problems, that's going to be harder to achieve now, not easier to achieve. It's not like you just force someone's hand, I think, and suddenly it happens. But anyway, I don't, that's not meant to be sort of the soapbox. It's just um, something I observed. But let me ask you a question to go back to something you said earlier. You said you had started looking at how to do things differently and how to reform because you saw cracks in how the system worked. Let's talk about that a bit more, because maybe can you give an example of that
Yeah,
in the context of what I just said? Because I think we'll probably agree on that. I'm not, you know, 100% cheerleader of every single thing USAID was doing. There are a lot of problems with, like any large organization or effort. But do you have an example of like a project, specific activities, why something didn't work well because of how the system was set up that you could give?
course, of course. Now I'm going to put a different hat. So even if I look at those examples that I mentioned to you in Bangladesh or Nigeria or many in South Sudan and other countries, the same examples I could also criticize when it comes to the speed, efficiency, the money we are putting and measuring that against of the outcomes and the bureaucracy and all that. So of course I could argue that argument that you heard so much on the news, and it was mentioned by Elon Musk or Marco Rubio or Trump or many others. I could also have, built the same argument. And that also one of the things that led me to start rethinking how we do things, because I saw that one of the main challenges is the bureaucracy in institutions. And here I'm not talking only about USAID, I'm talking about many others, especially the United Nations. I started thinking about the speed of response. I started thinking about long term. I started thinking about the gap between the strategy we are designing and the implementation and the operation on the ground. I started thinking about all the glass ceilings within the system that block people. So I started thinking about all that. And as I told you, I read the indicators. I will give you one example here. Um, South Sudan. I love the country. I enjoyed my assignments there. The people are amazing. Organizations are working extremely hard to make a difference. I have worked in remote areas in the bush in South Sudan, and we were receiving funding from USAID and other donors as well to those remote areas. And one of the examples there, we were doing this water tracking. So we were in an area, we didn't have water sources. We tried to dig for wells, we couldn't find water. It was dry season. So we were going to the riverside, which is like 2-3 hours drive, track water from the river, bring it back to the area, and try to, use different methods so that the people could drink that water. Of course, the water was never enough, but we were doing that over and over and over again. We put millions of dollars in that. Was it helpful? Of course. But the program design maybe would have worth it if we thought deeper and we tried to find other ways to find water in that area. Or maybe it was maybe more useful if we thought in a different way and tried to work with the local community to see how did they get water in the dry season before. And. So
Yeah.
here I'm not talking about, here I'm talking, of course it's held, but maybe there's a program design element there. That's number one. Number two, one of the examples that I like, also South Sudan, Ebola spreading through Africa. In South Sudan, I was working with a medical organization. We received support from USAID to do prevention activities so that we do our best. Ebola will not come to South Sudan. And by the way, USAID was one of the main donors covering that, helping us to prevent Ebola from coming. So USAID, government, us, communities, health facilities, we collaborated, we created centers, we started raising awareness. And I would say like, we were successful because we prevented it from entering. We did massive awareness campaign. Was it successful? Of course, major success. But I could easily criticize the element that now it was led by international organization. we didn't spend the same resources later to strengthen the institution so that the government could do that without us. So, of course, you could have those conversations. And when I started seeing all those different things in different countries, I just came to a conclusion. Let's try to rethink that governance and that way of designing programs and all that. And also, I am one of those who claim that there is an aid industrial complex.
Yeah.
And I spoke about it so much. I did a research about it so much, and I argued that so much, and all those things. But I have to admit, when I try to see how to break that complex, it's extremely challenging. I also argue that science diplomacy could be one of the ways, but it's extremely difficult and challenging. So you could of course, depends on which hat you put, depends from which angle you see the story. It's you will have different answer. But in few words, I want to say, tell me your incentives so that I measure your outcomes and judge your outcomes. Because depends of your incentives, I could read the outcomes and
Well, so I like that a lot. It reminds me of something we talked about yesterday, right? And this is a question I always try to go back to, and I get criticized fairly, very fairly by people, I think, for not asking the question why enough in all my conversations with people on this podcast. Um, why did the work matter? Why was it important? Why do we need to bring something back, et cetera? So framing it this way for a reason. And what are you tell me what your incentives are, and then we'll figure out what the outcomes need to be, right? If your incentive is just save a bunch of people's lives, then just move really fast to save a bunch of people's lives, right? Actually, that's what a lot of the PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief in Africa over the last 20 plus years, that program that President George W. Bush created when my dad was a USAID administrator, um, saved 26 million lives, right? Um, it was highly effective from that standpoint. I'm going to say this next thing. That is not the area I worked in over the last 20 years. I do not have all the information expertise in it. I'm not going to pretend to. But was talking with some folks recently who had worked on it and said, yeah, is there a question about did we need a better plan to start transitioning more quickly, more effectively over to local organizations and institutions? And from their perspective, that question was worth looking at. That question is worth looking at. So again, I give that example because to your point about incentives and outcomes, if the goal is save people's lives, great. If the goal is save people's lives and strengthen the institutions and invest, which by the way, bringing in an international organization or company and bringing in shipping companies to move pharmaceuticals in and out of into countries, that is a lot of people will tell you that's a lot easier than creating a sophisticated, resilient institution in a country that can take that over, right? So back to your point, also one of the points you just made. Well, one of the reasons, to be fair, that you weren't looking for more efficient, cost-effective ways of accessing clean water or getting people clean water, for example, one of the reasons is it's very challenging to do that. It's when you're in the midst, especially South Sudan's one of the most, I think people would say maybe the most difficult place to operate in the world right now, very sad. So, I think to try to be objective and fair, some of the reason these things don't happen, especially don't happen overnight, is it's very difficult to do. But anyhow, when I've talked to others who are all American, why does the work matter? People talk about doing the right thing. People talk about how the United States, how America is so prosperous. Not saying we don't have our own problems with inequality and poverty and lack of access to health. We have all those problems. I realize that. But, so one of my guests and old friends said, that old quote, um, to whom much is given, uh, much is expected, or there's, we sort of have a responsibility to reach out to people who to reach out to help people. There's a sort of a moral calling there. Some people will refer to. A lot of people talk about how much our aid programs or the USAID activities benefited the US just in terms of pure self-interest, soft power, trade, economic development, etc. But I wanted to talk about that. What did USAID or American assistance, USAID, mean to someone like you and to the programs you saw, the countries you were working in? Um, what did it mean? Why was it important, if it was even important?
Yeah. So the first thing is you know, uh, all the things that you mentioned. Of course, when I look at macro level or establishment perspective, I agree. It's a soft power, part of foreign policy, economy, aid for trade, etc., etc., etc. And for me, from my angle, it's investment in humanity, not only USAID, all the donors and all the things that we are all doing. But I looked at my own personal story. I didn't want to look at anyone else. Back in time, 2012, 2011, 2012, early 2013, I was in Syria, my early 20s. Uh, and I faced the same challenge and choices like many young adults faced at that time. Option one, you join the military.
Because the war broke out. Because the war,
Because
you're talking about when the war broke out.
yes, I
Yeah.
was, the conflict happened in Syria, and at that time it's the early stage, and you could see all those changes and escalation and death everywhere, bombing everywhere, destruction everywhere, and all that. And your main objective there is to survive the day. You can't even think about tomorrow. Can't think about the future. You just need to survive your day. So I am there, early 20s. I'm witnessing all that. My life just changed. And now I need to survive the day. So I could join the military because it's required, it's a mandatory military service. So as long as I am in the regime controlled areas, which was what at that time was the Syrian government, I must join the military. But because of my values and the way I look at things and all that, I can't carry a weapon and take that act. It doesn't match my belief. Anyway, option one, joining military. Option two, go to opposition areas, try to find a way to live there under the bombing and explosions and all that, and try to find a way to survive, and most probably also join the fighters, the opposition fighters. And you had a wave in Syria and Iraq at that time. It was ISIS taking territories, and at that time offering money and weapons and taking control of different areas. So that's a different way that young men, it was a way to survive in a way or another. You believe or don't believe in what they stand by, etc. It gave an option to you as a young adult. That's option three. Option four, you try to hibernate and live day by day, hide here and there, pray or hope that there will not be an explosion or something like that, and try to see a way just to um, find what you are going to eat or XYZ. Another option is fleeing the country, going to a refugee camp or someone outside. I didn't know anyone outside the country. So, most probably going to a refugee camp and waiting for organizations or
Right.
governments to provide you with support. Another option, go find a way, take a boat, go to Europe, which many of the people there saw it as the promised land, where you might receive support and then you find your way to have safety and you start from there. And, those were the options that there were among others, but those were, some of the things that will give you some kind of relief for your day, your survival. Now, I am young adult at that time, and I have those options in front of me, but I was trying to, do some good. I had a job at that time. I was trying to see how to survive. I'm getting so much pressure. I'm hiding most of the time and running here and there and living day by day, not knowing if tomorrow will come. And I buried so many people. I saw so many dead people. I saw many injured people, and I saw my country collapsing. So all the things pushed me in picking one of those options. Now, one day, small 15 minutes conversation happened with someone who guided me to one of USAID online learning platforms. It's called Global Health. I have never heard about it. I told you I didn't have that much access to internet and all that. So I go out of curiosity, seeing what's this Global Health. I open a Global Health platform. I start, you know, checking around, clicking here and there on what they offered when it comes to learning and all that. That moment, my life changed. My life took a totally different direction because what happened, my curiosity sparked also, further curiosity made me find edX, Coursera, of course, several global health, this e-learning by USAID and USAID experts and all that. And technically, it gave me hope and gave me a perspective and something to look at things from different perspective and different way. So I started doing those different, e-learnings here and there. Many I didn't understand what they are talking about, so I had to dig more. Um, I tried to build on that. One thing led to another, one thing led to another. Suddenly my whole life changed. It took different direction. So when I look back at that young man at that time and look at all the options he had, it was so easy to carry a weapon, so easy to go and you know flee or find a way to be in a camp, which later on in my life I found myself in a camp and I was living in a tent. And it was so easy, quick relief, survivor. But those e-learnings that I found online gave me different perspective, made me think about life and my options in a different way, empowered me in having different type of foundation. So I took different choices. So when I look at my own personal story, of course, I could tell you from the projects I led when it comes to humanitarian assistance, food assistance, economic recovery, income generation, climate action, human rights projects, and all that. But I have to admit, it gave me some kind of like different perspectives. This is number one. And number two, what I have realized in my life, especially reflecting at my personal life, I am someone who slept on the street, slept in a tent, and slept in five stars hotels. I am someone who received food assistance and non-food items and hygiene items from an organization or institution funded by USAID and others. And someone led millions of dollars global portfolios on that assistance. I am someone who saw countries collapse and countries grow. I'm someone who was in locations where I saw cities on the ground, Mosul, Raqqa, and cities building up, Dubai and Malaysia and other. I am someone who saw locations where people without anything gathered, mobilized each other, tried to take action. And that action was positive because they tapped into their values. So why I'm saying that? I'm saying that because when I look and reflect at my life and seeing all those different things in my life, ups and downs and all those different situation I faced, institutions disappears, countries collapse, economies collapse, cities get destroyed and gets rebuilt again. Fund comes and goes. But what you will always carry with you and what I carried with me in all those different stages, values. And the main investment that I could see when I look at USAID was value based leadership and value based, let's say, assistance that was provided to individuals like me who their life took totally different direction because of that. So I'm not going to put so much words in health projects and livelihood and human rights and water and sanitation and I just told you, for me that was one of the investment in humanity, but in a different way, in a different angle.
Investment in humanity. You sort of
and
left me
and
speechless here, but yeah.
one of the things that I liked during the Hajj hearing, when your father was answering questions around USAID and all that, I highly recommend people actually watching that. He was talking about those policymakers, diplomats, and leaders who, worked in their own countries at that level. They started designing policies and support their communities, and they were trained or supported or assisted by USAID at one of the stages in their life. And I could tell you, I could see a huge difference between policymakers who has civil society background and worked with those institutions and those who don't. Now, if you zoom in into the Syrian government, the new government, or the Lebanese government, the new government, and look at how they are approaching governance and policy, and try to, read what what they are trying to do or what they are talking about, or even the policies and those laws that they are trying to bring. You could see between the lines those um, values or way of thinking, system thinking that um, USAID was investing in. This is number one. Number two, look at their backgrounds. In a way or another, many of them, they crossed path with USAID and other institutions, of course, in the humanitarian development arena. But I could see huge difference between those who has that background and those who don't. And I think that's a very important element that we should look at when we think about what we are doing. And I have met so many leaders in so many countries. I saw how they approach their communities and try to build a better future outside the institutions because of certain perspectives they learn from such projects and programs.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to hear that perspective on, I think what it comes American values, to hear that perspective from someone like you who's never been to and it's funny too when you said that. I didn't obviously, like we keep saying, we don't really know each other. I mean, you've never even been to the US, and I'm going to say something that'll make people mad, and that's fine. I don't, great. Like, make people mad, Alex. You articulated American values and the significance of American values to me yesterday when we were talking a lot, saying some of the things you just said, but you articulated it in a way that it was almost more meaningful and more specific than many Americans could. You articulated American values better than many Americans articulate American values. And it's just, it has sat with me since we talked about it. And the example you just gave is a good one, I think, but about the significant, the sort of stark difference between people working in foreign governments in developing countries, uh, who had learned from USAID, who learned from Americans. And I think what's interesting about that too is that it says to me, I want your perspective on this, but it says to me that USAID was the best international representative of American values overseas. Maybe they weren't the best. I don't know if that's even the word, but they were a significant representative. They represented American values to people. Do you think that's true?
So I actually have several thoughts here. Let me organize them. So the first thing that comes to my mind, and it's one of the things that I told you I didn't fully agree with some of the people who were in the previous episodes. some of the guests, I forgot the name, and I'm rephrasing here, mentioned that when the people thought about the Americans and the American assistance, they knew compliance, anti-fraud and corruption, due diligence, and all that. And another guest also, and I really liked this episode. That episode, he was talking about how the people in other countries perceived Americans as fixers. They would come, they would try to fix some things. So now, what I don't fully agree with is my experience and what I saw in the different countries where I have worked and um, uh, you know, worked with leaders and managed leaders and all that, is that the Americans and the US, it was way beyond compliance and due diligence and anti-fraud and corruption. And it's not really the fixers or all that. It's the American dream. What many people don't realize that the way we in in so many countries and nations, at least myself, when we think about Americans, we think about work hard, no matter who you are, white, black, Arab, Latino, Republican, Democrat, right, left, man, women. If you work hard and you go the extra mile, you get results and you imagine your future in different way. That's how we see the Americans. So of course, the compliance and all that, but I kind of like disagree with that. It's the American dream. So this is number one. And that's what I said. I don't fully agree with that. We see the American dreams. This is number one. Number two, the American dream is not actually only for Americans. I've never been to the US, but I adapted that dream with the Syrian dream, the Afghani dream, South Sudanese dream, Nigerian dream, Emirates dream, Turkey dream, Iraq dream, Bangladesh dream, Kenya dream, and all the dreams that I learned from in other countries and created my own dream. So, and I have seen so many people in Afghanistan living the American dream, so many people in Syria and Iraq, in South Sudan, in the bush, in remote areas living that dream. I think there are so many things in common, way more than what people realize, between us in the global south or myself and you in the US and in America. This is number one. Number two, when I read Obama's memoir, the first one, Dreams from My Father, I could hear my story. I
Mm.
hear my voice. When he speaks about him and his father, his trip to Kenya, trying to see how he fits within the society, that identity crisis, who he is and who he wants to be and how to play a different role and his struggle and all that. That's my story. That's the story of so many people I have met and seen in so many different countries. Hundreds of thousands of people I came across, they have exactly the same stories. Like when I read his words, I feel like, wait a second, that's kind of like I am, like
Yeah.
I hear my voice. On the other hand, when I read and listen to J.D. Vance's memoir, the crisis of family, the forgotten class in the US, the issue with the social capital, what does it mean? All the things in the system and the economy and the society and all that that actually don't design your future to look better. How he struggled when he was going back to his society, how he lived as a stranger and has that cultural outsider. That's my story. That's also the story of hundreds of thousands of people who I met before. So I think there are so many things we have in common, but sometimes the things that make us, different, they appear. And now, when I look at David Goggins, Michelle Obama, David Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs, and so many others, their stories is like many other stories of people who I met in remote areas, conflict zone, the bush. But the thing is that those people in those different locations, they imagine their future within their own country dream, and they try to live it. So I think when I read all those stories and I could relate to them and all that, I think the missing element sometimes is that I feel all of us in the US, in Europe, right now I'm in Copenhagen in Europe, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in all the places, it feels like we are in a boat. And we all know that they are they are like rocks, and we are going to crash because we are going to hit the rocks. But we are not agree whether to go right or left. And we know, we need to save ourselves, but we are struggling in having the conversation and listening to each other to agree, shall we go right or left to save ourselves? And that's what I could see, and that's what I could read. So to go back and go to the core of what you asked me, there are so many things in common. And I think we have to think about those things that they are in common. And those positive deviants, because from academic perspective, I'm considered positive deviant, you have to ask them why you didn't carry a weapon, why you didn't commit suicide, why you didn't stay and live in a tent. Why? Because those answers will make you realize why you took the other choice. And when I give you my answer, one element of so many reasons will be the values that I have learned from observing, listening, reasoning, so many things in the American values and the American principles and cultures and what you have.
This will all sit with me for a long time. So thank you. I'm gonna conclude on that note because I can't think of what else I could possibly ask that would take us somewhere even higher than where you've taken us. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Ali, before we conclude?
I think the first thing, I like to categorize things in my head. The first thing, I'm not going to lecture the Americans on what to do, what not to do, and all that, because I have faith and I believe that, you will find your way. History says that you always go ups and downs and you find your way. So I'm confident that you will find your way, and I believe in that. I hope that you could again have dialogue and listen to each other, because we count on you being better and being strong. This is number one. Number two, to USAID staff and those who were with USAID and all that. If you were a humanitarian because you were with USAID, then USAID is gone. But if you are a humanitarian because you believe in humanity, then there are so many ways to be a humanitarian. One of those ways, listen to those who wanted to dismantle USAID. One of those ways, try to help others within your own community. And one of those ways is take care of yourself. And the second thing I want to say to those who work with USAID, I hope that it was said publicly, thank you for your service. I wish that, it was said or something like that. I'm just saying it from my side. Now, the last thing I want to say is my own community and the people who I lived with, grew up with, collaborated with, and all those people from different countries. We have different cultures. We have different accents and we have different languages. We have different religions, different perspectives. We come from totally different backgrounds. But all of us, we want to move in one direction. And that direction is about building better future. So my message to all those who are like me, or from where I come from, or the global south, is let's look at the things that bring us together and what we have in common before looking at the things that are different and bring us not together. And thank you again for what you are doing. I think it's insightful, it's relevant. I hope you continue with this and you have different perspectives and different people in this platform. Thank you.
And thank you very much for all your work and for spending all this time with me today. I think that's a wrap, folks. Thanks again thanks for listening all the way through. One more plug to like, share, and subscribe. Unsung Americans signing out.